So welcome to the next 10 years of Node team meeting for October 28th, 2020. We will start by going through the issues tagged for the agenda, but I don't know if anybody has any announcements that they'd like to share before we start doing that. If not, then I think we can start with the first issue that was tagged, and that is 35.323. And then I think after that, we can get back to the session. We had a session to start with on the needs and wants of the constituencies. We can get back and spend most of the meeting on follow on to that. So 3523 was an issue that was around adding, tweaking the values that we'd worked on before. And I guess there's been some discussion back and forth. I know, Wes, you've been involved. I've been involved a little bit. I guess it's around how strongly to balance, compatibility, web compatibility versus other things.
Yeah, we've sort of gone back and forth on this quite a bit. I think Jeffrey's point is sort of the same one I think we had talked about on our calls, right? I mean, It's really like where does it sit? Because like there are cases where we really do value it, but that's because it aligns well with the rest of, what the project is doing. And he's, I think, trying to kind of, the goal here is to make it a little bit stronger than that. By saying maximizing compatibility. And that to me means like, this is number one. Like if there is an option to be compatible, we have to take it, which to me is like, that's pretty dangerous personally.
Yeah.
Which is what I think I tried to say in the issue. So I don't know if anybody else has said much after that has really, like you. Oh yeah, I guess Michael, you commented after. I didn't see that until now. I'm reading.
Yep.
It would be nice if Jeffrey had been able to attend to talk a little bit maybe about why he's seeing this as more important than we originally phrased it.
Yeah, maybe that's the suggestion we should make. I might have thought of that, is to say, hey, do you think you could make the next meeting?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. So here, why don't I comment that? Because I think that's a good next step. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm rereading some of this, and it just reminded me. So he did, in response to the comment I was saying, he did actually say that he thinks the bar for breaking compatibility should be very high, higher than anything in priority 2. Or below, obviously, because if it's higher than priority 2. And I think that's where we had it, right? Was in the...
Yeah, we had it in one of the, we did have some coverage for it, but later on in the priority lists.
Yep.
I guess it's and I think part of his point was as well that it is part of that first section, which is like developer experience.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to make too. Was like if as a developer who's used to the web APIs, it's really confusing if Node just slightly diverges, so it makes for really bad usability. So I can see Jeffrey's point.
So I can see, like, personally, I can see mentioning it there in that first priority, because I think it is part of that. It's just how strongly it's mentioned there, right? Because it's...
So this is one that's really interesting. I think that's probably why we've gone back and forth on it.
Exactly.
It's part of like every single one, right? So the developer experience is the people coming from the web APIs. The stability is, do we break a bunch of things to keep compatibility? Because right now we kind of have, or to maximize compatibility, because we might have to in order to achieve that goal. Maintainer experience is affected because if we had that as an ultimate, high level goal, we'd have to make a ton of different decisions, including refactoring a ton of existing APIs, and then it's in number 5 as well. So this particular one kind of spans all of them, whereas some of the other ones are a little bit more like siloed in one, which I think makes this conversation much harder, because it's like, well, yeah, it is a part of that, so we put it as number 1. We want people to have that good developer experience when they come from other places, and part of that is having the APIs, but also we only put in the APIs that make sense in the Node context, whereas adding maximizing sort of implies that we need to add all of them where possible, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of where, like, where was the... Right, so that's where, like, the kind of thing I posted them when we discussed the first time, which is a bit early because I guess we didn't have consensus, so I edited it afterwards. But like compatibility and interoperability with browsers and other JavaScript environments where it fits in the Node.js context. That would be, that's much softer than maximizing, right?
I think that those could be compatible in the sense that, like, the Node.js context is greater than the web in a lot of cases, like file system stuff, at least for now. Like some of the crypto things that we have that aren't necessarily available in the web or wouldn't be needed in the web. CLI stuff, like that kind of stuff. So perhaps that could be tweaked to address that. We do care about this a lot, but like there are cases where Node's base is diverges because of it being a server-side or client tool.
That's what I was kind of trying to get at, is like, compatibility and interoperability with the browsers and other JavaScript environments, but that's tempered by where it fits in our context, because our context isn't exactly the same.
I have an idea here, because I think that what Tierney brought up is, I think, really interesting. What if we actually made a separate section to talk about interoperability in the priority list, and we just made a Venn diagram, and we said, like, look, we overlap. We know that. There are places that it makes a lot of sense to have APIs that are shared between the two. But there are these slices on both sides that don't overlap. And in those cases, there might be a web API that doesn't fit in a Node context, or a Node API that doesn't fit in a web context, and that's all right. And like, do something like a diagram and says, look, what we're saying is we understand there's overlap. Where there's overlap, we'll strive for compatibility, and make concessions where necessary. But also, that doesn't mean that, when something's over on the left side in the browser of the Venn diagram, that like we have to implement it just because. Does that sound like a good way?
Yeah, like an extra paragraph. Like, I think keeping a single line or something, something short in the values and like in that list, but then having another section that kind of explains that further might be a way to go. Which is, I think, what you were suggesting, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And we could just like link to it in the doc from the one line. And just say like, or more on our stance on web interop, or web interop or something. And would that, Tierney, help address what you're saying, which is like, there's just different scopes, because that's just not captured, I think, in the one liner. Or yeah, maybe you're unable to.
Yeah, sounds like maybe Tierney's. Or if you're talking, Tierney, you're
sorry.
muted.
No, I didn't know that was a prompt for me. I thought you were talking to Michael.
No, I was just saying, does that idea help with what you're?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's generally in line.
So is that something you could comment on the issue to suggest, or?
Who's you?
Wes?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Tierney, do you have bandwidth to do that?
Yeah, I can do that. Sure.
Well, me too. I can. It doesn't matter.
If you would like to, I would probably prefer that, just because I think you have a little bit more context on this one. But yeah, I if needed, I can.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'll do that.
So should I still comment on the issue, suggesting it'd be great to get Jeffrey
I can
to
do
this?
both. I'll just
Okay.
share the comment right now, and I'll post both.
Okay, he'll do both. Perfect. Okay. So we'll leave that. Where is my notes now? Okay. Discussed a bit more. Okay, so then we can move on to the next issues. There are 3 issues that were tagged. One, revisit time slots next year, 10 years for collaborators, which I think Mary had opened, and I think would be good to make sure we wait until she's here. I think in the past, we'd also agreed that we were going to start out with the needs and wants of constituencies, which is number 20. So we can flip back to that. I've got an attendee to promote, sorry. Welcome, Jean. Sorry for, took me a little bit to recognize that you need to be promoted.
It's okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, no problem. So, okay, so I'm going to pull up the Fun Retro again. So this is the link which I will paste into the chat. So these were the constituencies we had. Now I think what I realized is that we actually had a constituency which there was a pending PR for. So let me just, that we didn't have in the list. So I think that one I want to look at our constituencies, and we had direct application developers, library package Node.js core maintainers, and organizations with investments in Node.js. So that I want to add, new column, because that came out of some of our previous discussions. So I'll add that in. Right, so we put these together, and I guess we'd done some grouping. So I wonder if our next step, especially since we'd missed one column, I wonder if we should have like another round of people adding what they think each of these groups want. We can then, group them together again, possibly do the voting, and then figure out next steps. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me, but it seems like a fair bit. Well, we're not going to do that today, right?
We have 40 minutes. So we could, I think we could spend like 5 minutes adding in more things, probably 5 to 10 minutes grouping. And then based on that, we'd still have a little bit of time to figure out what to, like, I agree, we won't close on this necessarily in that time, but I think we can make some progress.
Okay. I mean, I'm not opposed, since we don't really have much else to talk about.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's like, this is our, it's kind of like, it seems like when we get into the other discussions, we always fall back to, well, we need this baseline. So we needed the values. Now we want to know the needs. And so I think it's worth spending all of our time on this before we dive into the other discussions, right? Because otherwise they sort of fall back to what's it based on, right?
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that was missing was this organization's side, which anyway, yeah, I just feel like that's not too hard to.
Yeah. So why don't we spend like 5 minutes? We'll go back to 5 minutes, people adding, I can say, can I hide the things again? How do I do that? I'm wondering. Just looking. Okay. There. So now you can see your own cards. And so what do we think, like 5 minutes? Is that enough for people to go through? And like we can add that organization's investments in Node.js, as well as any other ones that people can think of and for the other ones? I guess we can start with 5, and if we need more, do that. So I will set a timer for 5 minutes, and I'll say go. Does everybody have the link?
Yep, that's good for me.
Sorry, I somehow managed to switch the order unintentionally. I don't know quite how I did that. And I don't know how to switch it back. Anyway. Okay, so our time has run out. Does anybody need more time? Want more time? Sounds like not. So I'm going to share my screen. I'll share the window that has that anyway. And I will show the cards. So maybe we should start out by grouping the ones under the Node.js organizations, just to, since we did that for the other categories as a start. As people read through them, if you have suggestions on which one should be grouped together.
I think ability to advocate for work is pretty much the same as a seat at the table, right?
Okay, these two.
The one is phrased as more big picture, and then the other is phrased as more, you know,
yeah,
maybe small, but I think the same idea is there. Maybe even a good path to report it. That's slightly different. Okay. Confidence that the project is well run and continue to be maintained successful is, I think, the same as confidence in the health of the project upkeep and leadership. So it's the bottom one and the third.
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
Actually, a clear understanding of how to interact with the node project and a good path to report issues to the project seems the same. That and the one below it.
Yeah, they're kind of in the... I wonder if this level playing field fits in with the first one, like a seat at the table when big decisions are being made.
Does the person who wrote that think that fits together?
I wrote it, so I think it kind of, it's in the same category of things, right? Like, you know, being able to participate and influence the project, right?
Is it possible that compatibility and stability, when possible across releases to minimize upgrade work, goes with predictable LTS and upgrade path?
I think those are kind of similar concepts. So yeah. Okay, why isn't that? Right.
I feel like good security, like good management reporting and updates for security fixes is adjacent to like releases in LTS, right? Because you're going to want that to come out as a patch release of your supported platform.
So sort of, right, yeah, it's okay. So it's, maybe that fits, like should we combine those into, they're kind of it's all around, you know, understanding when releases will come out.
Yeah, but I
it's
think
a little different.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I feel like we could even flesh that one out a bit more and add, like, you know, I mean, that's a pretty important one. I guess maybe that's, it's maybe not necessarily that it needs to be fleshed out more. It's just that that one is, I think, particularly important.
Right. And I think we have the similar, do we have the similar one for application for operators? Yeah, good process handling for CVEs by the project.
I think one of the ideas we discussed in the last meeting, or previous one at least, was to look at also the cross-cutting ones. Because I think
sort of a table, yeah.
Cutting concern.
I snuck one into direct to end user.
Yep. I don't know if that fits at all with the API docs, which are simple and understand. It's a little different though. No, I get your. It's kind of like it would be nice to know what's coming down the pipe, right?
Yeah, and I think I'm basically describing a roadmap. I know that's not necessarily a goal of a project.
Yeah, it's
Is there, but maybe it should be a goal. Like, right? It's
sorry.
pretty valuable. But
One of the things that I find useful, I built a basically a mega blog post of all of the releases between 10 and 12 LTS. So like 10 LTS and 12 LTS. Less is like a this is our roadmap, but more of a this is what's changed between these two, and like here's all the stuff. So like for example, with 14 LTS, that took a lot of work. I don't know if I'm gonna do it manually again, and I probably don't have time to automate it right now. But like doing something around that of like, hey, here's all of the notable changes plus all of the commits. It's big and it's very achievable, but like having something like that is maybe a way to kind of address that without having a forward-looking roadmap.
I think even like, forgetting the roadmap label, if the goal of this work is to come up and say, here's what we think is important, and then identify like the technical directions that we think are important to support that, it would be, in my mind at least, useful for each major release to kind of highlight what progress has been made in those different areas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like the individual changes can be quite overwhelming sometimes, right? And if there's like a new a new option on a command line or on one of the APIs or something, that's going to be too low level to really be useful to a broad audience.
Yeah.
But having that sort of like, here's the trend and here's the progress, like we have the challenge, I think, in that we're very aggressive of moving things back. So when you come to an LTS release, we struggle a little bit to sort of hype what's there because, well, it's already available in 12. But it wasn't actually available in 12 when 12 came out, right? And
right.
So like having a little bit more, having some of that communication, which is like, hey, here's the things we think are important, and then here's what we've made during this release time span, might help to address some of that.
I like that idea. Like, so it'd be like, here's some steps we took towards better web compatibility. Here are some steps we took towards better file system operations for tooling. Yeah, I like that.
Right. Like if through this we can kind of come up with, if you read through this and you said, oh, okay, I can understand what people think is important. Now, because it's open source, it's not like we then say, well, okay, you and you go work on this.
Mm-hmm.
But we've highlighted it, and as a project, we should be looking to see, well, are we making progress on that? And then we can talk about what progress we have made.
One question I have: do you know how like the notable changes are marked? Is that just something that like the releasers manually do, or is that like a tag in GitHub?
There is a tag. Yeah, I think the ask is that like if you think that this something that a PR that you're doing is a notable change, that you tag it that way.
Okay.
And other people can tag it as well, right? Like the author or people reviewing and so forth.
Potentially one thing we could do there to like do that less manually is exclusively use those as a way to kind of collect that stuff. And that would be a way to kind of like say, hey, here's all the things that have to do with file system and that are notable in this period.
It is certainly something like when I, if I'm writing a blog post or something about what's the new release, I go back and look through the change log for, say for the 14 one, even you can look through the changeable, like when it's gone LTS, you can look through the notable changes for all of the 14 releases.
And 13, right? Like it's
and
also
13, right? Yes, 13. And 13, exactly.
So,
like you have to go look through history.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so maybe actually, that could actually be automated. Like show me all the notable changes since release. Now it still takes some interpretation to put them in the context of the sort of, what we think is important, but at least does give you some data.
Something that fits into this is not only, hey, here is a notable change, but a little bit more robust. And this is what that notable change means to you, right? Like as an end user or library author or something, because unless you're really plugged in, you might say, oh, great. Like, you know, I'm trying to think of one that's coming down the pipe right now. What's that? The audit events, the performance hooks or whatever. It's like, okay, cool. Like once that lands, that's a notable change. We got this new API. Diagnostic hooks. What are they called? I can't remember the name, but
async hooks or
no, not async hooks.
context.
The new one.
The
Diagnostic channel. Is that the one?
Right. Diagnostic channel is one. Yeah.
Yeah. I just for some reason couldn't remember the name. Like when that lands, it's great, but then you're gonna like most end users are gonna say, okay, cool. What do I do with that? Right? And feel like there's a gap there between the change logs and all that, and what the project provides to tell an end user what's the value. I think a lot of like user land, like people come out with blog posts and you know do a lot of great work there, but I think the project sort of doesn't give a lot in that area, and I think that kind of fits under this.
Yeah, I guess it's we rely on the individuals to promote those things that they think they're important. So like the diagnostics working group, I'm sure will try and promote that. And we would likely write a blog post on the Node Medium, but I think what you're saying is that's not necessarily everything we should do or effective.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. I don't know if I have an actual, like, here's what I would like to see sort of recommendation or anything. I just feel like I know sometimes it takes me a little bit to see a change that's coming in and understand like how that will impact my work, right?
I, for what it's worth, I have seen that both myself as someone who's been looking at these things for 5 years now, and also as other people are like, this sounds cool. What? You know, you're actionable thing.
Okay, so well, anyway, that's an interesting one. Thanks for adding it, Ben, because it obviously just triggered some good discussion. So were there any others that were added to the other areas that we should touch on and group potentially?
I'm actually surprised that direct end user is so short, and I think that's means it's not correct yet.
It's not well represented, right?
Yeah.
I mean, part of what we probably want to figure out here is like, okay, we've got a set. It's going to be a set that's, you know, reflects the people who were here in the couple meetings. I think it's good to have a concrete starting point, but we want to then, you know, how do we get additional validation that we've got a good list, aren't missing things? I mean, different ideas come to mind, like a survey, or I don't know, what are the different ways we can go out and say, hey, we're building this, who's got some input?
A question I have is like, I feel like direct users is foundational for application operators, application developers, library package and library/package authors. Like the ones there now currently apply to all of those. And like those are branches of that. Does that kind of make sense to others?
Yeah, this is where I think there's these cross-cutting things. I actually, so I think the reason why we decided to break those three out separate from, even though they are all direct end users in some way, is that it's also like partial overlap, but not complete. So for example, an application developer may actually never interact directly with most Node APIs. They may be doing it through a framework or a build tool or a, you know, whatever. And so they have different concerns, I think, when they do interact with the direct Node APIs or not, or maybe when they interact with them through the framework lens or whatever, then where direct user was supposed to mean sort of the most raw sense of that, which is like somebody who literally installs Node and basically no libraries to do some task, right? And that to me is where we were trying to get direct end users.
Right, they basically are going to run something. They're not going to write code. They're not going to, you know, they're not necessarily even operating it. Like application operators are more like, similarly, they don't necessarily write any code, and they're more focused on running it. The direct end user is running it, but really only for themselves, right?
I was actually seeing them not necessarily even not writing code. Like I was thinking like somebody who installs Node to like process some CSV data or something, and they write like a small snippet, and they may install a package, but like they don't deploy it anywhere. It's not really an application. They're not publishing it, right? Like, but that's a pretty common use case.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Not writing. Yeah. Okay. So maybe I shouldn't have thrown in not writing code, but yeah, like they're doing it. That's for their own use, I guess, is the.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way I was seeing it is they're actually saying require path, require FS. Like whereas a application developer may be saying require, FS extra and then building something on top of that because they needed, well, that's maybe a bad example. HTTP is probably a better one, right? Require HTTP would be like a direct end user. Require Express would be an application developer, right? And they may interact with a lot of APIs that are from Node, but they're doing it via the lens of Express.
I had a really interesting experience the other day where one of my peers is working on an internal thing that's probably going to end up becoming a product. But he's not like a Node person, and it's a Node app. And the Socket.io site was just like, oh yeah, if you're using Express, just do this. And he's heard of Express before. He knows what Express is, so he just reached for Express when he didn't need Express. He just needed HTTP. And I think that's something to consider there, like in that framing, is that like there are things that are the behemoths in Node that people will always reach for, even if they don't need. And I think that in framing things like that, we should take that into account too, of like the community push is toward Express or whatever, like Commander or Request or different examples. But I think that's something we should also keep in mind in situations like that, or in framing things like that, is like just because someone is using Express doesn't mean that they actually need it.
I think that's a great point. And this is why I think the direct end user is a constituency that's been quite underserved. And I think this diagram shows it when we have like 5 items and like hundreds and, tons in the
right.
Because I think, that's very common. And in the web server frameworks, we've been talking a lot about like, how can we address this? Because so often it's like one usability quirk away from being usable by a direct end user, and instead they reach for request or GOT or whatever, right? Or Express. How can we address that? And I think we need to probably spend quite a bit more time on what is the direct end user story here. Like, what is the reason why in the past those, they are using Socket.io on top of Express on top of HTTP when really all they needed was like, maybe HTTP or the net. I don't know, or maybe WebSocket should have been built in, and then that's the direct end user story, right? Like there's a lot of things there where I think there's gaps, specifically because we've addressed application operators, developers, and library authors a lot more than we've addressed direct end users in most cases.
Yeah.
The way we wrote up direct end users was users who run tools themselves, install Node.js, run tool, deal with errors. So I don't know if we need to expand that, but I think that's still in the flavor of what we've talked about, right? Like it doesn't talk about whether you write code or not, but you're basically running it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is someone who like runs, like is online or something.
It's like, somebody who's actually running it versus like the application developers. Yes, you're running it, but your focus is building something, right?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think we should flesh that description out at least to say like this could, maybe in examples of like this could be somebody running a Node, application where they install Node, then install the application and they run it. But it could also be somebody doing just like some scripting, local scripting. Something.
I hate to get real businessy, but like I feel like we probably need user profiles for
this
each
is
of
what
these.
this is effectively what we have.
Okay.
Right? Like this list of constituencies here. If you haven't seen it, we landed this. I'll paste
This
in
is kind of
the.
supposed to be our attempt at that, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's basically here. I'll paste in the chat. Like that's our list of them, and PRs. We should just PR in changes and refinement to expand that to make it better.
Yeah, I more meant like, Tommy is a X developer working at X company doing X thing type of a user profile.
Yeah. Maybe that would be a good thing to add as a to-do and see like if we could just add it as we could open an issue that says like develop a little bit more robust user profiles. Add to the constituencies list to like make it more clear what we mean by these different constituencies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. I don't think we want to stop and focus on that more than we have, but it's a good thing to, if somebody had time to help fill that out, that would be good. So in terms of this list, we now have 12 minutes. So I think what we want to try and kind of figure out is, what do we do next in terms of turning this into something we think that reflects what these, what's needed. I guess there was a suggestion, like, can we take these and put them, like, make the ones which are common, right? Which I think would be a good thing. And then the next thing would be to try and get broader input. So I don't know. I mean, so I'll volunteer to try and take this list and build that. Here's the sort of macro list with the checkboxes for which ones want which. Given that we had that, what would our next step be in terms of like trying to make sure we've got it right?
I think opening a PR with that will draw some feedback just naturally.
Okay.
But I do think it would not hurt before we're done with this. I don't think this is a next step, but I think at some point toward the end of this process, doing some sort of user survey would probably be good, and just say, look, here's what we've got.
Right.
Have things like, do you agree with this on a scale of 1 to 5? Or like, there's a lot of ways we could structure a survey that would not be totally open-ended, because that would be really hard to go through, but like that could help us narrow in what we want. And especially if we can let people bucket themselves into these different user groups.
Right.
So we can see if like what we got aligns with what they think.
Yep. Yeah, basically like maybe people could even fill it out multiple times, but it would be like, choose your role or choose your constituency, and check which of these are requirements for you, and list like, and then an ad hoc list of like, what have we missed, right?
Expecting people to fill it out more than once is maybe asking too much. I'm not opposed to that. But I think even if we just give them a checklist of which of these user groups do you think you fit in, we can then slice and dice whatever data we get across those different groups.
I'm just more like, what if they think I'm both an end user and a developer?
Right, but that's what I'm saying. You could just give like an open-ended box and say, which of these are you?
Right, maybe and check multiple of those. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then it doesn't necessarily tell us which ones they're saying are a requirement, are like a need based on which one, but at least it gives us that sort of macro. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because then we can say like, for all the people who self-identify as operators, did we hit the mark with our operators, needs? Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, again, not really next step, because I think that we would struggle to get a meaningful survey result out of like more open-ended things like we've been discussing on these calls.
Right.
But I think at the end, just to do like a sanity check, does this align with what our users really think would be valuable?
It might be interesting to get a couple guests on these calls too, and like get someone. I could drag someone in from Google who is like doesn't work on Node directly, but works on Node.js, and we could probably find someone who does more front end code.
I can help with that too.
Okay, so what's the like in terms of like to do something similar in terms of needs, or to review what we've got? What should we set up to like, and what would the agenda of that meeting be? Is I guess my question.
Maybe have someone come in from a specific constituency and kind of concentrate specifically the conversation on the cards we filled out in that area. See if we're accurate.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. So I heard a couple volunteers. Do you want to figure out if you can find somebody from one area or another? And
before we go forward, I have an idea on this. What if we brought one from each group together all at once, and basically we all just kind of sat back and said like, hey, discuss these things. We've brought one from each group. Cross pollination of these ideas I think is really valuable there. And then we just sort of let them go for 15 or 20 minutes where we kind of are probing questions, because that would be both a slightly more efficient use of time, I think, and also would get people across these different groups talking, which might spur more interesting things than just like, hey, you're our end user, tell us what you think, right? Which might be like a little overwhelming.
So you're suggesting like one from each of them to a meeting, or was that it? Like we try and find a
one of each to, sorry, the way you phrased it, invite one person from each of the constituencies all at once, like make schedule a time where they can all come together. And then we just sort of say, here's the list, the table come up with, like, discuss, and maybe we have to come up with some like discussion points to get them started.
Right. Okay, so then what we need is somebody tagged to find somebody for each of the categories, right? I think I could volunteer to find somebody in terms of like the application operators. Is anybody I think Ben and Tierney, you had some potential people in mind for some other categories?
Yeah, I could probably find some folks. Either I could definitely pull in application operators. That one would be super easy. But like I could probably pull in some either front end folks or package maintainers.
I was thinking front end folks because I could probably find someone from the Angular project, which I help, but like I don't think it interacts with Node too directly. I think some of them do, but it might be interesting to get their perspective.
I could potentially pull someone from what's it called? Puppeteer. No, wait, is that it's Lighthouse? Wait, what's the Google one? What's the Microsoft one? The Microsoft version of that.
That might be interesting for application operator, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And then I could probably pull someone from VS Code if that would be helpful.
So
they maintain a lot of packages.
All of these groups technically fit in with the organizations with investments in Node, but one thing that I might be able to, I'll ask around, but I might be able to find like some manager level folks who or higher, but I don't know about higher because I think most of them are more agnostic to the platform that can talk about what an organization is looking for. But Netflix is a fairly small and flat org, so I assume actually like Google or Microsoft would be able to provide better, or Red Hat would be able to provide better people like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because there's different aspects to that too. So
yeah, that's specifically what I'm thinking. Like there's the boots on the ground perspective is basically all the other categories, but the organizations, we really need somebody who's looking at it from the, what if my whole team was JavaScript engineers? What do I want out of the platform?
Might be interesting. I could probably ask someone from the cloud Google Cloud Functions team to join, because that's one of our main products is Node on Cloud Functions. So, but the interesting thing about Google is we're not like Node.js isn't one of our like gold languages. So it's people who have to run Node.js on Cloud Functions, but it's not necessarily their first love. So they're actually a really interesting demographic.
Very mirrored at Microsoft with .NET on Azure Functions and supporting Node.
This is really interesting because this is another consistency we haven't added, which is platforms, right? This is not just, you're not an organization with investment in Node per se. You're a platform offering Node to other organizations, right?
Yep. And for what it's worth, that blog post I was talking about earlier, where I collected all of the differences between like when 12 LTS shipped and 14 LTS, or sorry, it was 10 LTS and 12 LTS, but same thing. That was for that team specifically, because that was a request from them of like, hey, what are the differences? And so I pulled together all the notable differences.
That's an
I do this. I try to do the same thing for Cloud Functions occasionally. A couple of people do.
What is the Google Cloud Functions loved language?
Well, I mean, Node's a very popular language on it.
Okay.
I think just Googlers, internal Googlers, are more accustomed to Go and
yeah. Okay, I got that then. I was just like, that's surprising because like I've heard that the feedback I get is like 3/4 of the major use cases for functions are all written in end up people using Node. But I can understand as an organization, there's more history with other languages. So
yeah, that's
right. And it's the people like building the platform, right? Like they're optimizing for that experience. They're not necessarily as familiar with Node compared to what they're building it with.
Got it.
So I put our like line from the constituencies doc on organizations. I think we should add platform builders or platform maintainers or something here.
I'm not gonna lie, I thought that was application operators.
I was just gonna say that might fit into that category.
Well, so I think there's slightly different things, right? So operators would be somebody who's like running a service, got to look at metrics. They get alerts when a service goes down, like they need to debug those kind of things. Whereas I see the platform as, should we make support for Node in our Cloud Functions first class, right? And that to me is like the organization's decision. And then there'll be a bunch of boots on the ground, people who are like, ICs building those out, and they're going to have the needs of an application or a operator in mind. But the actual like first decision, should Google or Microsoft build a first class experience on top of Node in their cloud infrastructure, is like where I see the organizations with investments constituency being involved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, maybe like, I guess if you PR'd in a new category, that would be a good way to sort of tease out the differences.
Do we think it is a new category? Also,
I understand where you're coming from. I just, like, we don't want to have too many categories either, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Right.
Here is like, the nice thing about adding it here, first, let's be real. Like, this is like 4 companies, right? Like 4 major players. I'm sure there's a ton of, we could probably go deep and say, look, everybody who has some sort of cloud functions infrastructure is in this category. But I don't think that their needs are going to be drastically different from the, should we make it a gold language or whatever? I don't know. Is that the right term from Google? Like at Netflix, it's the paved path, right? So we've like,
I unfortunately have to drop off because it's a minute into the next meeting I'm hosting. But
can we like offline try to split up the work if we do want to try to find some people?
Yeah. Let's we can create an issue to say, okay, let's find people to bring together to, you know, from each of the categories. If anybody wants to volunteer to create that, that would be great. I'll volunteer to do try and put this into it's like an overall matrix.
Okay.
And we'll talk to everybody next time.